too high because it'll be like blocking everybody. Unless we keep it. Okay, with you in just a second. Oh, there's. Oh, good. So, okay. So, I think the topic is, what is Vedic culture actually, right? Here we go. And of course we have devotees from other countries listening or watching on Facebook. The word Vedic the word Vedic is found, of course, in Shastra, Vaidika. Hare Krishna. Come in, Houston. Actually, I'm just going to go like that, so it's not my face. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Sanskrit and English, of course, are intimately related linguistically. And so just like in English, we form an adjective from a noun. So from Veda, you can say Vedic or karmic or something like that. So same thing in Sanskrit. That's actually from Sanskrit, forming an adjective that way. So from the word Veda, we have the word Vaidika, Vedic, or Vaidika, which means the same thing. So the adjective Vaidika, or Vedic, interestingly, in the Bhagavatam is used much the same way that Western scholars use it, and a little differently than we use it, so I'll explain that. Our use of it, which of course Prabhupada used, is certainly justified because Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, in chapter 15, text 15, that Vedais cha sarvair aham eva Vedya, that by all the Vedas I alone am to be known. Oh, you put it up here. Don't believe the critics, this is just water. Even if I slur my speech after a few minutes. You could tell someone's an advanced devotee because they don't spill it on their shirt. That's a sign of spiritual advancement. So, but the word Vedic, in the Bhagavatam, the word Vedic is used in contrast to the word Tantrika, which I'll explain. According to Western scholars, use the word Vedic, and the Bhagavatam uses the word Vedic to indicate a certain level of sacred Sanskrit literature, which is called Shruti. And that includes, chronologically, well, we won't get into the whole scholarly thing of chronology. But anyway, that includes the 4 Vedas, Rig, Sama, Yajur, Atharva Veda, which is basically, if you look at the Rig Veda, each name of the Veda, or the name of each Veda, describes, it's actually a description of what's in that Veda. So Rig in Sanskrit, or Rig means a hymn. So Rig Veda means the hymn Veda. That's like the hymn book. That's where you have all the hymns that are chanted at Vedic sacrifices. And then Yajur, or Yajus, the Sanskrit word Yajur means instructions or formulas for how to actually do a sacrifice, what the meaning of the sacrifice is. And so that's the Yajur Veda. And then Sama means sort of like the musical part, how you chant the hymns, the meters and how you chant. So the Sama Veda is the Veda that explains to you how to chant. And then the Atharva Veda is kind of like the voodoo Veda. And that's why Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, Tri Vidya Somapa Bhutapapa in chapter 9. He says those who study the three Vedas and so on, so that it's very common, this Trivedi or Triveda, Trividya, because the fourth Veda was a little, it has a lot of knowledge, but also is like, you know, if you want to really zap your neighbor, this is what you do. Like put spells on people and incantations and other really fun stuff. So anyway, so that, and according to scholars, so anyway, this whole Vedic apparatus, this apparatus of the four Vedas was sort of a complete package for performing these great Vedic sacrifices, like a Soma sacrifice, which you produce this celestial beverage, Soma. And so Brahminical life in ancient times wasn't so boring, I guess. Because, you know, after going through all this trouble and toil of a big sacrifice, at least you get a little really nice refreshment at the end. So that's the Vedas, and then there is the Upanishads. Actually, before the Upanishads, and the Vedas are kind of dated according to by linguistic study. It's just like if you read Shakespeare and then you read, let's say, today's newspaper, you can see the English is a little different. And if you know anything about English, you know Shakespeare's older. Or if you read something that sounds like Shakespeare, if you read something that says thou and thy and all that, it's older. So there's many ways that you can tell that a particular text written in English is older or younger, approximately what century or even what decade it was written, and so on. And so in the same way, by that type of linguistic analysis, the language of the Vedas, the four Vedas is the oldest, and the oldest of those is the Rig Veda, probably the oldest book in any language. And so then after that, what happened is, in Vedic culture, you could say in ancient Indian history, is that some people became frustrated with just an emphasis on ritual. And this is something which is sort of a universal dynamic. For example, if you look at ancient Israel, the center of worship, many centuries before Christ, was the temple in Jerusalem. And then at a certain point, there were people that felt frustrated because they thought things were becoming too ritualistic, and you get sort of these little priestly mafia. They control the temple, they get all the donations, and so they decided they wanted to, get away from this. They wanted to focus more on knowledge. They wanted to just live more peacefully, so they went to the wilderness. I mean, in Israel, it's a small country. There's not a lot of wilderness. And so to get away, like in India, basically you had two options for wilderness. You could go to the deep forest, because there were great forests that, long ago in India, which were called Mahavana, great forests. And also you go to the mountains, the Himalayas. And so they decided to go out to a place where no one wanted to live, and they went to the Dead Sea, and they wrote down their teachings. They became the Dead Sea Scrolls, and those were the Essenes. But this dynamic where you become frustrated because things are kind of becoming, if not completely mundane, but just ritual and priests, and it just doesn't seem to be a lot of emphasis on knowledge and spirituality. And exactly the same thing happened in India. Just like in Israel, ancient Israel, some people decided to go out to the Dead Sea. They were kind of like ancient Jewish yogis. And so in India, the same thing happened. You have all these cities and these purohits, because the king had his priests, so the well-connected Brahmins were priests of the king, so they lived very well. And seriously? Actually, mine's gonna ring next, so. So anyway, they decided to get away. So there are all these sages that wanted to get away from the inevitable, you could say, the corruption of living with politicians and all this wealth and everything. So they went out to the forest. And one of the words for forest in Sanskrit is aranya. Another word is vana, like Vrindavana or Madhuvana. And another word for forest is aranya, like Naimisha Aranya, which means Naimisha forest. So they went out to the forest to pursue spiritual life and mystic life, and they wrote books. And because they were living in the forest, the Aranya, the books were called Aranyakas. Like, for example, the Brihad Aranyaka. And and then those books sort of developed into books which were more focused even on philosophy and mysticism, and those books are the Upanishads. So again, we're still on the level of Shruti literature. And of course, it's not that this knowledge didn't exist before then. I hope you don't mind, I'm just giving you all this history of the Vedic literature. Yeah, no extra cost to you. Because I know all of you emptied your bank accounts before you came today, and so you can give me all that after the class. Anyway, so the Upanishads, in that sense, are not newer. It's not like this knowledge didn't exist, but the difference, and this is what Western scholars, many of them, not all of them, can't figure out, because it's interesting that in the 19th century, Indologists, those who study India, wanted to say that the Vedas were not as old as they really are. Why? Because they can't be older than the Garden of Eden, because that just like ruins everything. And so since the Garden of Eden, they figured out wasn't, maybe so many thousands of years ago, like by calculating biblical genealogy. So Vedas have to be younger than that. They can't be, because, nothing existed before the Garden of Eden. Certainly not pagan Bibles. And then of course, when Indology, the academic study of India, became mundane because there was a cultural revolution in Europe, and secularism took over. Secularism, agnosticism, Darwin, Marx, all these really interesting people. And so at that point, they still wanted to keep that more recent date, because they just didn't want to give that prestige to India. Old is gold, and so they didn't want India to have something like an original culture. And so the way they dated these things were kind of silly. I don't go into all the details, but it's really silly. So, when the Vedas, if you look at the ritualistic 4 Vedas, which were meant for fire sacrifice, I'm actually going to get to the topic. I just thought it might be interesting to know something about this. So if you look at the 4 Vedas, the power of the 4 Vedas was in the sound itself. In other words, it didn't even matter if you understood the Sanskrit, like who cares, just chant it, because the power is in the sound. So to give an example of that, in the Bhagavatam, there's a story. It's in the 6th canto, where Indra killed a Brahmin named Vishwakarma, because Vishwakarma's father was from the Asura community, and Indra found out. No, actually, his father was Twistad. Anyway, this Brahmin, not Vishwakarma. What was his name? Vishwarupa. Forgot. Anyway, Vishwa something. So he was offering sacrifice for the gods, which brought power to the gods, but he's also offering something to the Asuras. What? Oh, he was related to, he had some kind of family connection with the Asuras. So when Indra found out that he was also empowering the Asuras by making sacrifices for them, he thought he has to go. So Indra killed him. And then his father, Twashta, was a demigod, was enraged, and so he did a sacrifice to create this big monster that would kill Indra. So at the critical moment in the sacrifice, he had to chant Indra Shatru, which means I'm now creating the mortal enemy of Indra. But he actually put the accent on the wrong syllable. And so instead of saying Indra, because Shatru means mortal enemy. So instead of saying Indra Shatru, he said Indra Shatru, which means Indra will be the mortal enemy of this monster I'm creating. In other words, Indra will kill him. And of course he created that Bridra. Bridra means covering, so it means the demon just covered everything. And so just because he got the accent wrong, he got an entirely different result. So the power was all in the sound itself. I mean, down to which accent, which syllable you accent. Whereas in the Upanishads, it wasn't like that. It was the knowledge. For example, let's say if I'm speaking English and because I have a thick American accent, anyway, let's say if I accent things a little differently than you might, it doesn't matter because you understand, it's the idea. It's not about just the accent or for example, Prabhupada once wrote me a letter and said, read my books and explain them in your own words. Thank God he wrote me that letter. So,
you take that one?
Yeah. So the power is in the knowledge. Therefore, for example, let's say people 500 years from now write books in English about Krishna. Obviously, they're going to use the language of their time. And so therefore, you find the language adapting on the Upanishad side, but not on the ritualistic Veda side. So it looks superficially like the language of the ritual part is older. But that's just because because in the knowledge section of the Vedas, Jnana-kanda, the importance was the knowledge, not the sound itself. Anyway, so Vedic. So you have the 4 Vedas, you have the Upanishads, the Aranyakas, the Upanishads, and then there's some sutra literature like Shrota Sutras, like great state rituals, which were very lavish, and were actually important. If you read the Mahabharata, like for example the Rajasuya sacrifice or great weddings, Swayamvaras, and it was actually an important part of the national economy. The Brahmins really depended on these great sacrifices because the king would distribute very generous charity. You see that when the Pandavas are going to Swayamvara of Draupadi, and there's, the roads are filled with Brahmins going there because it's kind of like the gravy train. It's, that was a big part of their economy. So you have the Shrota Sutras, which describe the great state-sponsored ceremonies and rituals. Then you have the Griha Sutras, which were just the domestic sutras that Brahmins would just do at home. Each one would do it in his own home, like the Agnihotra. So basically that corpus, that body of literature, that's Shruti, and that's what the word Vaidika means in the Bhagavatam, referring to that body of literature. And then the only problem with that is it's not enough. And we know that it's not enough from Brahma Samhita, which Lord Chaitanya personally gave us, because the Brahma Samhita says, Vedeshu Durlabham. It's hard to find Krishna in the Vedas. It's hard to find Krishna in the Vedas. For example, in that Shruti literature, you don't really find a clear description of Krishna. You don't find a clear description of Vaikuntha, of the chapter view of Krishna's plenary expansions, like Vasudeva, Sankarsha, and all that. So, and therefore, there was need for additional knowledge. And in Sanskrit, the verb tan, T-A-N, means to expand, for example, or to extend. Like in the first verse of the Bhagavatam, we find that verb used in the past tense. Tene Brahma Hrida, that the Lord extended Vedic knowledge to the heart of Brahma. So that verb tan and tra means an instrument. So an instrument to expand our knowledge is called tantra. Later on in India, there was kind of like this hippie tantra, where you sort of break all the principles. That was kind of like the evil tantra, but this is an earlier one. So tantra, it's described actually in the Bhagavatam, first canto, chapter 3, the list of incarnations. Narada Muni is accepted as an incarnation because it said Tantram Satutama Chashta, because he taught a Vaishnava Tantra, which is Narada Pancharatra. And so deity worship is another point. Deity worship you won't find practically very much in the Shruti, but you do find it in other works. And so the Bhagavatam says again and again that in order to come to a perfect understanding, you have to learn both from the earlier Vedic literature, but also from the Tantric literature. And the Bhagavatam itself gives us both. The Bhagavatam itself gives us both bodies of knowledge. And so that's how the word Vedic is used in the Bhagavatam. It means the Shruti body of literature in contrast to the Tantric body of literature, and both of them are required. That's the only way the word is really used in the Bhagavatam. It's not used as an all-encompassing term for everything we do. And in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, we find the word Vedic used in an even more restricted sense to refer, it's actually, in the CC, it's almost practically always used in this little term Vaidika Brahmana, which means a ritualistic Brahmana, that just knows the rituals of karma kanda, as opposed to a Brahmin that actually is enlightened, that knows Krishna and so on. And so the word is simply used for Vaidika Brahman, and that's it. So, Vedic culture, a word about translating Sanskrit to English. There are certain words in Sanskrit that directly translate into English. There's an English word that means exactly the same thing. And an example of that is the word Prakriti, which means nature. And so in Sanskrit, the word Prakriti can mean the birds and the bees, nature. Or it can also mean an individual nature, like your character, the way you are, that's your nature. And you find that in the Gita 3:33, where Krishna says, Sadrasham cheshtate swasya prakriter jnanavanapi, that even a wise person acts according to his or her nature. So the word prakriti, nature, perfect translation. Or, for example, a word where the English actually comes from the Sanskrit, the English word is, like he is, or we is, in certain, anyway, just kidding. So he is, and the English word is Sanskrit asti. In fact, that's where the S comes from, and is. And that's German ist, asti. So it's the same word. It means to exist or to be. One is. So there are all kinds of Ishvara means Lord, and that's actually what it means. Deva means God. In fact, in Sanskrit we have the word divya, from which we get the English word divine. Divya, divine. And from that same root div, you have the word deva. Jupiter, by the way, the god of the Romans, is Sanskrit. Because Jew, D-Y-U, like the English, they say, do your duty. So D-Y-U, Jew, means heaven. It's actually it's the stem form of the word divya or deva. It means heaven. And Peter, father. Peter, like paternal. So Jupiter, father of heaven. So anyway, so there are many words in Sanskrit that have a direct equivalent in English. Like, for example, when Prabhupada translates Krishna saying, Maya dhyakshena prakriti suyate, by my supervision, nature is. So supervision is a very precise literal translation of adhyaksha. English is a combination of its original Germanic roots and then a bunch of Latin words that came in through Church Latin, when Latin, after the fall of the Roman Empire, Latin was just the language for anyone that, I guess, had more than 7 teeth in his mouth. I mean, educated people. And so it came in through Church Latin and also through the Norman invasion of England, 1866, something the English probably like to forget, and so then the French ruled England, so all this, Latin French came in. So for example, in supervision is just Latin. Super means over, and vision means, and so the Germanic form of supervision, of course, would be oversight, Übersicht in German. Oversight, supervision. Anyway, so that's an exact translation of adyaksha, because adi means over. That's exactly what it means, over, adi, or above, super in Latin, or over in, and aksha means vision or sight. So if you translate adyaksha as supervision, it's a precise literal translation. And the reason I'm mentioning all this is because if you say, what's the Sanskrit for Vedic culture, that's a good one. Because there really is no Sanskrit that literally means Vedic culture. I mean, the whole idea of culture, if you think about it, the word culture, it's, in some ways, it's a modern idea. Like, and if we say, for example, I don't know what you're allowed to say, political correctness, but like the culture of the indigenous people of Australia, or whatever we're allowed to say now. But, or like say, if you talk about Mexican culture, or if you talk about Bavarian culture, or the culture of, let's say, Zulu culture from South Africa. And so what that really means is, among other things, a traditional way of dressing, of architecture, folk festivals, music, cuisine, certain traditional way of cooking. So it's something like what we would call an ethnic tradition. So when we hear the word Vedic culture, which does not have a direct Sanskrit equivalent in Shastra, there's a tendency to think that it is some kind of divine ethnic tradition, like Vedic architecture, or Vedic recipes, or Vedic dress, or Vedic music. There's a problem with this. First of all, the problem is not only that in Shastra there is no term Vedic culture. It doesn't mean that it's wrong to say that. I mean, as long as you know what you're talking about. So there's a hermeneutic principle. Hermeneutics is, anyway, I have all kinds of jokes about that word, but hermeneutic just means trying to come up with a rational, intelligent approach to understanding a text, especially a sacred text. Like, for example, what is allegorical? What is metaphoric? What is literal? What is historical? What is, et cetera, et cetera. And the Vedic literature has all these categories. Like Prabhupada says in the CC that there are illusory stories. He uses that word in the Bhagavatam, like when Krishna's queens were kidnapped after Krishna left this world, or the fratricidal war of the Yadu dynasty. And the Chaitanya Charitamrita says these are, stories meant to teach, but it didn't really happen exactly like that. And so, so Vedic culture, so hermeneutically, okay, so here's the hermeneutic principle. If you have an English phrase or term in our teachings, in our books, like Vedic culture, and in fact, there is no precise Sanskrit for that. It's not a literal translation of something in the Shastra. Then, doesn't mean you can't use that term, but you need to come up with a definition that is in Shastra, Because if you have a non-shastric term and a non-shastric definition of the term, where are you? You have no standing. And Prabhupada always emphasized that what distinguishes our movement from movements that are less authoritative is that we're based on Shastra. And Prabhupada said all the time, I have not concocted anything, I didn't invent anything, I'm just faithfully presenting Shastra. So, what do we do when we have a term that doesn't have, it's not a literal translation of Shastra? So what is a definition for that term that is found in Shastra? How can we define the term Vedic culture in a way that is supported by Shastra, by our scriptures? And maybe we'll, start with the things that are not supported in Shastra. What is not supported in Shastra is the idea of Vedic culture as a divine ethnic tradition. That there is a Vedic way of dressing, there's a Vedic way of cooking, there's a Vedic way of designing buildings, there's Vedic music. Let's take music, for example. The problem with Vedic music is that, first of all, for the last 1,000 years, approximately, maybe 900 years, or whatever, Indian classical music has been dominated by Muslims. Because in the pre-industrial world, if you're a good musician, you didn't just fill up an auditorium and everyone buys a ticket and that's how you make a living, or people buy your records, because back then there were no records or whatever, and also there were no auditoriums in a sense. So even if you look at Europe before the Industrial Revolution, if you were a musician, you needed to have a patron, someone that had to support you. And in Europe, for example, it would be either the church or a noble, who had a lot of money. And that's how, for example, you look at great musicians like Johann Sebastian Bach, who was supported by nobles, then he worked for the church, he was the cantor, the music director in Leipzig. And so either he had to work for a noble, Handel also worked for a noble, or for the church. And then Vivaldi, for example, in Venice, Vivaldi was actually a Jesuit priest, and the church supported his music. So in India at the time, there was a similar situation, but they didn't really have like these big state religions. It's another interesting thing, actually. If you look at the Mahabharata and the Bhagavatam, there are no religious institutions. It doesn't mean we shouldn't have them in this day and age. We need them. It's just that it's interesting that there are no religious institutions in the Bhagavatam. So you had to get money for the king or from nobles, and India was ruled by Muslims. And so therefore the Muslim rulers were the patrons of music. So if you were a musician and you wanted to make a good living and you had a family, you had to please the Muslims. And the Muslims, of course, gave great preference to Muslim musicians. And that's why to this day, most of the great classical musicians in India are Muslims. And so did the Muslims absolutely preserve Hindu music? I don't think so. There's a striking resemblance between Indian music and the music you hear if you watch TV in, let's say, Saudi Arabia or Iraq or other Muslim countries, and guess why there's a resemblance. Anyway, another point about Indian music, Indian music is distinct. It's not exactly the same as Muslim music, but there's definitely, there was a lot of influence in the Hindu substrata. But another thing is that in Indian classical music, unlike in Europe, they didn't write it down. Like we know exactly note for note what Bach wrote or what even earlier people wrote. Monteverdi. If you go back even before the Baroque period, you go back to the 1500s, we have music that was written in Europe around the time of Lord Chaitanya, which is really, I really like it. I play it myself because that's how I try to forget sometimes that I'm a leader of a religious institution, is that I play music. And so we know note for note exactly what people played and composed, let's say at the time of Lord Chaitanya, because they wrote it down in Europe. They didn't write it in India. In Indian classical music, they actually favored improvisation. Improvisation, which means you kind of, it's almost like a modern rock and roll band. Okay, we're gonna do these chords, you know, we're gonna do, okay, it's, you know, it's C, F, C, G, F, and so you just have this chord, you have this, you know, chord progression, and then everybody kind of, you know, bands when playing together, they can improvise, and then someone does a solo, then someone else does a solo, they go here, they go there. Jazz is like that. Jazz also is very strong in improvisation. By the way, you see this very clearly. If you know that concert for George, that concert for George Harrison, it's very interesting because the first part, you know, you get like 2 CDs. One is the Indian concert, the other is the Western one. And what's interesting is that for the Indian concert, Ravi Shankar is kind of, you know, rehearsing the musicians. And at one point he gets a little exasperated because they had Indian musicians, but they also had Western classically trained musicians, and who were having a little bit of difficulty following the Indian musicians, who were very highly trained or just practiced in improvisation. But the English musicians, they read the notes. They're very good at that. They're very good at reading the notes, and they're very good musicians, but that's just not what they do. And so Ravi Shankar was like, what's wrong with you? Is that, well, maybe they were trained in a different system. Maybe that's it. Anyway, but because they didn't write the music down, do we know exactly what music sounded like at the time of Lord Chaitanya? Actually, we don't. Do we know exactly what music sounded like 5,000 years ago? Much less so. In the case of, let's say, food or dress, I mean, what are we talking about? There's all these variables. When you multiply variables, you get like hundreds of thousands and thousands of variations. For example, in India, which is, I mean, some people live up in the cold mountains, the yogis. Himalaya means the place of snow, the place of ice, the place of cold, Himalaya. And some people live in tropical jungles. Some people live in the desert, Rajasthan. They live in all kinds of places. On the coast. And they obviously ate different food, they wore different kinds of clothes, and there were different customs. There were different customs. Even we have proof that actually there were different customs in India at the time of Krishna. For example, when Bhishma was going to get wives for Pandu, and after securing Kunti, actually Pandu won Kunti. It's very interesting. Pandu is one of my personal heroes. And he came back in Chaitanya Leela as the father of Brahmananda Roy. But it's funny because you read these about these Swayamvaras. Swayamvara literally means personal choice, and it didn't usually work out that way. But so even when princes would compete for the hand of a princess, and it was like a competition, like you had to do some amazing military feat, like archery. And so in almost all these Swayamvaras, even if you won the girl, you got to fight your way out of the arena. So, you know, Prince won the girl, and he's got to fight his way out, and it seems like they weren't like real big on following the rules. Which I think is actually a symptom of how the world is becoming degraded, because they had, okay, these are the rules, but no one follows them. But what's interesting is that when Pandu won Draupadi, Pandu was described as very, very powerful warrior. When he won Draupadi, all the other princes just said, congratulations, and got out of his way. So anyway, so Pandu won Kunti, and then Bhishma went to get Madri from the kingdom of Madra. That's what Madri means. She's from the kingdom of Madri. So, interestingly, her brother, who would eventually fight against the Pandavas in Kurukshetra, was Shalva, or Shalya. Shalva's the aviator. Right? It was Shalya. So when Bhishma went, he said that, Shalya said that we have a different custom here. We don't give a dowry, we demand one. So it was a very proud royal family, so Bhishma didn't say, that's not Vedic culture. He said, he got out his checkbook. So, I mean, there were different customs. There were different countries. And people dressed differently and so on and so forth. So we just don't have evidence. For example, how should a sannyasi dress? Well, as I said last night, according to the Bhagavatam, which is our most important shastra, as I said, my two choices personally are deerskin or streaking. Both of which somehow are not my style. So, but that's a detail. It's not like it's not like the Bhagavatam says glorify Krishna, and that's true eternally, everywhere. So Rupa Goswami makes this distinction in chapter 6 of the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, Nectar Devotion. There are fundamental or basic principles of Krishna consciousness which never change. You can't mess with them. It's like there's a little sign that if you open this, you void your warranty. And so it's like if you mess with these spiritual principles, you void your warranty. But there are details which Prabhupada said you should adjust. In fact, twice in the Bhagavatam we find the term Deshakala Vibhagavit, which means a knower of the differences, distinctions of place and time, Deshakala. This is used once to glorify Bhishma in the first canto when he's on the bed of arrows. And this phrase is also found in the fourth canto when Narada Muni instructs Dhruva Maharaj to worship Krishna, knowing the differences between place and time. And if you look at Prabhupada's purports in both places in the Bhagavatam, he emphasizes, actually, I'll read it to you. Here comes the bombshell. I'll read you, theoretically, if it opens. Let's see. Well, here it comes. Let's see, 4854, have it in a second. Which is again Dhruva Maharaj's, feels so modern, like doing things on a computer trying to talk. Actually feel very good about myself. Let's see. This is what Prabhupada says. This is how Prabhupada explains that this is Prabhupada speaking. The method of worship, this is Prabhupada's purport, for 4.854. The method of worship, chanting the mantra and preparing the forms of the Lord, so practicing Bhakti Yoga, is not stereotyped, which is why so many people in ISKCON think that it's stereotyped. Is not stereotyped, nor is it exactly the same everywhere. It is specifically mentioned in this verse that one should take consideration of the time, place, and available conveniences. Our Krishna consciousness movement is going on throughout the entire world, and we also install deities in different centers. Sometimes our Indian friends, he's not talking about devotees here, I mean at least not ISKCON devotees. Sometimes our Indian friends, puffed up with concocted notions, that's flattering, puffed up with concocted notions, criticize, quote, this has not been done, that has not been done, unquote. But they forget this instruction of Narada Muni to one of the greatest Vaishnavas, Dhruva Maharaj. One has to consider the particular time, country, and conveniences. What is convenient in India may not be convenient in the Western countries. I'll repeat that. so I can lord it over everyone that disagrees. This is Nardamuni. What is convenient in India may not be convenient in the Western countries. Those who are not actually in the line of acharyas, or, that means even if you are in the line of acharyas, who personally have no knowledge of how to act in the role of acharya, which means really spread the movement. So those who have no knowledge of this unnecessarily criticize the activities of the ISKCON movement in countries outside of India. The fact is that such critics cannot do anything personally to spread Krishna consciousness. If someone does go and preach, now listen to this, taking all risks and allowing all considerations for time and place, allowing all considerations for time and place, it might be that there are changes in the manner of worship, but that is not at all faulty according to Shastra. So, obviously it doesn't mean that we do sinful things. It doesn't mean that we change our philosophy. It just means that we have to present Krishna consciousness in a way that attracts people. And we can judge by how many people we are actually getting to join us. One time Prabhupada said, progress means to increase the family members. So getting back to this point of Vedic culture and what evidence do we have that there is an eternal ethnic tradition? And actually there isn't. Actually there isn't. I don't want to harp on dress, other than the fact that I'm, anyway, no more jokes. So, but Bhakti Siddhanta, first of all, Lord Chaitanya and the six Goswamis, whom Prabhupada personally told me were the ideal Vaishnava sannyasis, and he told me I could understand them by studying that song, Bande Rupa Sanatana. Their dress is Kopina Kantashrita, copines and rags. So what that means is because that's what sadhus wore in those days, and that they didn't wear deer skin, they didn't go naked, even though the Bhagavatam says, that's what sannyasis and brahmacharis do. So you have Lord Chaitanya and his most advanced followers not following some detailed instructions of the Bhagavatam, even though Lord Chaitanya says the Bhagavatam is the most important shastra. Why? Because those are details, they're not basic principles. Dress never is a basic principle of Bhakti Yoga. It is always a variable detail. And so you have Lord Chaitanya and his followers not following the Bhagavatam. You have Bhakti Siddhanta and our Prabhupada not following Lord Chaitanya and the six Goswamis. Of course, they're all following perfectly, but they understand that how do you follow the acharyas? By figuring out how to adapt. Whether you are a brontosaurus or a religious movement, if you don't adapt, you go extinct. It's true. It's true for religious movements as much as it's true for, very large animals. Who are you calling a very large animal? Anyway. And so what's the standard? Now some devotees then argue that, well, does that mean we can do anything like people can just dress indecently in the temples? Nope. Because Krishna, in fact, does give us a standard. He gives us criteria for how to do these things in the Bhagavad Gita. The criteria is the mode of goodness. Because after all, the spiritual platform is Shuddha Sattva, purified goodness. Sometimes there's the idea that Krishna consciousness or the spiritual platform is like a completely different thing from the material mode of goodness. Actually, it's the same thing, but Krishna consciousness, the goodness is purified. And material goodness, it still is tainted by material consciousness. And this is what Krishna explains in the Bhagavad Gita. He says, Tasmat sattva nirmalatva. He says, because sattva is actually pure, nirmala. Nirmala is the same thing as amala. Mala means dirt or stain. So nirmala means pure, without contamination. So Krishna says, Tasmat, therefore, sattvam, sattva guna, nirmalatva, because it is pure. Prakashakam, it is enlightening. Literally, it is enlightening. Prakashakam, anamaya, and it's free of inebriating. Amaya means like a disease or infection, contamination. And so if something is free of contamination, it's called anamaya. It has no amaya. And so, so what's the problem? So, goodness, if you look at the Bhagavad Gita, goodness should just be, it should do the trick. Why doesn't it do the trick? Because sukha sangena, because the mode of goodness produces happiness, and people become attached to that happiness from goodness. They become attached to the pleasure of being a good person. And therefore Krishna says sattva guna binds us. And jnana sangena. These are the two things that sattva produces. According to the Bhagavad Gita, it produces happiness and it produces wisdom or knowledge. But we become bound by attachment to that knowledge also. And so therefore the material mode of goodness, it is, you could say, the spiritual platform, but it still has that red card. Oops. Someone should have given you a trigger warning. Anyway, so that's a joke. So, if you take goodness, and just remove that material contamination, it is Krishna consciousness. It is Krishna consciousness. And that's why why does Krishna go to all this trouble in the Bhagavad Gita to describe over 20 different aspects of human life in the three modes of nature? Like, why all that trouble? Because that's the whole point. You're supposed to live your life in the mode of goodness and offer your life to Krishna, and then it becomes purified goodness, it becomes a spiritual platform. So obviously, if one is going to a house of God, which is called Devagriha in the Vedas, the house of God, you obviously show respect. I learned that from my mother, because I was a kid, we'd go to different religious days. If you have good parents, you learn from them. When you're going to a house of God, you dress properly, you clean, you show respect. So that's the standard. And obviously, wearing very informal clothes or indecent clothes is disrespectful, and you don't do it because it's not the mode of goodness. So what Krishna doesn't say in the Gita, always think of me, worship me, dress like me, and you will come to me. That's kind of a bizarre idea, really. Because even if you were going to dress like Krishna, this is a no-brainer, you would dress like Krishna in this age, right? This age? Krishna came in this age? No, I'm going to skip yugas here. And even though Krishna appeared just a few centuries ago, I kind of feeling sort of Dwapar-ish, So, interestingly, we actually know more or less how Lord Chaitanya dressed, because it was very recent, it's historical. And the great acharyas like Bhakti Siddhanta, like Prabhupada, like Bhakti Vinod, didn't dress like that. So we see clearly in the behavior of the acharyas that no, you don't try to dress like Krishna. That's not the point. What you do try to do is dress in a way so you can fit into your society and people feel comfortable with you. So that's the idea. And for example, Lord Chaitanya H.D.Goswami didn't dress like that didn't follow the Bhagavatam. Why? Because, even 500 years ago in India, you really didn't want to walk around naked. Not a good idea. Especially because India at the time of Lord Chaitanya, in most places, Orissa was ruled by King Prataparudra, who was a Hindu Vaishnava king, but in most of India, at least northern India, it was ruled by Muslims, and they had a very different idea. The Muslims are the ones that don't show your body, and so you can understand how under Muslim rule, there was a serious decline in streaking in India, among the sages. So because they just didn't appreciate it. So therefore, Lord Chaitanya did not wear deer skin and did not, wear nothing. And then Bhaktisiddhanta Prabhupada did not dress the way Lord Chaitanya, because what we're finding is that every generation of acharyas or avatars, they're fitting into their society. They're fitting into so what does it mean to follow the acharyas? For me, of course, first of all, what it means, let me put it this way, there are three things that we can't change, because people say Prabhupada said don't change anything, and then there's all and I just read you where Prabhupada says adjust everything. So how do you reconcile these things? It's very simple, and that is just go back to chapter 6 of the NOD, where there are two categories. There are basic principles and there are details. Change the details, don't change the basic principles. So therefore, there are three things that Prabhupada did not want us to change. Number one, our philosophy. That's not a detail. That's who we are. We don't change our philosophy. Number two, we don't change the basic spiritual practice that Prabhupada gave us. And number three, Prabhupada wanted us to be faithful to the institutional framework that he created, which is called ISKCON. Those three things Prabhupada expected us, his faithful followers, not to change. But other things, for example, Prabhupada sent Tamal Krishna Goswami to China, and Tamal had to cut off his shika and his, he dressed like a businessman with a suit and everything, and of course he followed the four principles. He told me this, he had to sit at these dinner tables with people eating, literally, hot dog. In the literal sense of the word. So, and the result was Prabhupada was overjoyed that Tamal had made this great achievement. So why did Tamal do that? Because there were legal barriers. But it's very easy to prove, which I can do in a second, that cultural barriers can be even more difficult. For example, in many Western countries, like France as an example, where the movement has really had trouble, because the French have a very strong sense of their own culture. If you look at how the movement's doing in France, and how the movement's doing in China, it's literally doing 1,000 times better in China. At least 100 times. In China we have thousands and thousands of devotees. They're all over Mayapur now. Whereas, I guess they're learning to coexist with Russians. They're all great devotees. So, they're wonderful devotees, but my point is, if you go to France, you're not going to find a lot of devotees. There are some very good devotees in France, but the movement is not doing well. And some of the good devotees are, getting some programs, but I want to give them credit for what they're doing. But to say that we don't make many devotees in France would be generous. So, and yet in France, there are no legal barriers. There are no legal barriers to the movement in France, but there are enormous cultural barriers. Enormous cultural barriers. For one thing, because of, it's funny, because in America now, with our president who's very impressive sociopath, anyway, he, it's a big issue, immigration, building a wall, and blah, 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 and stuff. So, but look at Europe. I mean, Europe, immigration is an issue, but I mean, thank God. I mean, but the illegal immigrants in America are Catholic. There's very few Catholic terrorists in the world. And so in Europe, because they're getting this, and it's the same thing. Poorer countries from the south wanting to come in. Same thing in America, same thing in Europe. And Europe is North Africa. And so, of course, a lot of good people in the Muslim community. There's a lot of good people, but there are also problems. There are also problems in terms of the treatment of women, in terms of, there are cultural issues. Let's put it that way. There are cultural issues. And so it's a huge problem. And so what it's caused is, if you know anything about what's going on in the world, Europe, maybe 20 years ago, was like, it was called this little microcosm of extreme liberalism. Because Europe was just like, they were to the left of everybody else on earth. But now, with this immigration issue, it's swung. Now, all the political momentum in Europe, whether we're talking about England, we can talk about France, Germany, the Eastern countries, Czech Republic, Hungary, it just goes on and on. Now Sweden, Denmark, Italy, I mean, you name it. The political momentum is on the right now. And practically the main issue for this growing movement on the right is they don't want so much immigration. But what does that mean for ISKCON? It means this is probably the worst possible time in Europe to try to culturally colonize Europeans. Like, you need a new culture, we're going to culturally colonize you. I mean, that's their worst nightmare. Their worst nightmare is that poorer people come from the south, they have more babies than we do, and they take over. And so this is like straight talk. I mean, I apologize if I say something that's not politically correct, but you can't have a rational discussion if you follow all those rules. So the point is that that's their worst fear. That's their worst nightmare, is to have some foreign culture come, especially from the south and the east, India, and just sort of, and establish a new culture in Europe. Europe is rising up against this. So what is our response? Showing our extreme cultural sensitivity? Festival of India. So that's just an example of how I believe, that's what Prabhupada's talking about. We don't change our basic philosophy. We don't change our philosophy. We don't change our spiritual practice. We remain loyal to Prabhupada and his mission, but we find a way to fit in. So to me, this is just my view. And obviously, I'm not saying this as someone, and I can't tell you what to do. I'm just sharing with you how I see the world. That to me, to follow Prabhupada, to me, to follow the Acharyas is, I have to do what they did, and that is fit in. Of course, people always say, well, Prabhupada came and everything. First of all, Prabhupada, basically, I'm doing what Prabhupada did, and that is just kind of living the way that's natural for me. Prabhupada, that was his culture. Plus, Prabhupada preached in the West for 10 years, 1 decade, which was 1966 to 76. He arrived in 65. By the time he realized after a little while that the great glorious revolution is not going to start in Butler, Pennsylvania. With all due respect, I mean, it's a nice little town, but it is Butler, Pennsylvania. And so Prabhupada went to the Big Apple, went to New York, and Prabhupada got started. ISKCON started in New York in 1976. Prabhupada's last trip to America, and in general, last preaching trip to the West was 76. So it's a 10-year period. And what every historian knows is those 10 years were like just amazingly anomalous. Basically, Krishna transform the West, to open a historical window for Prabhupada. So you have a period where the biggest fad among young people is to have a guru, Indian mysticism. I always say that when I used to sell books at American universities, 72, 73, half the activities that were being advertised on those boards was, this guru's coming, that guru's coming. The Beatles had gurus, everyone had a guru. Here a guru, there a guru, everywhere a guru. Now, at this time in America, I can't think of one guru that anyone's heard of. So Prabhupada, why would Prabhupada change when the whole world was just going crazy over Indian stuff? And why would you change it? So, this Guru Maharaji, I won't start. So but he filled up the Astrodome. The Astrodome was the first covered football stadium. It's a football stadium, like 100,000 people. He kind of filled the Astrodome, 60,000, 70,000. He filled it. We couldn't fill the Astrodome. Practically any Indian guru that came that had just, this much charisma, or a little bit going for him, would just get a lot of followers. We're fortunate because Prabhupada was a real thing. But all kinds of gurus had big followings. So Prabhupada rode this powerful cultural wave that Krishna created for him. And then once ISKCON started, it's just, Krishna, that's it. The wave machine stopped. The historical window closed, and we're back in the Western world. And so I believe that I have to follow Prabhupada by finding a way, preserving everything that Prabhupada asked us to preserve, adjusting everything that Prabhupada authorized us to adjust, and finding a way, as Lord Chaitanya did, as the 6 Goswamis did, as all the acharyas did, finding a way to fit into our society. For God's sake, Lord Chaitanya took sannyas from an impersonal sampradaya. Why? For the same reason I went to Harvard. That was the accredited sannyas degree. Harvard is not a Vaishnava institution yet. But because Lord Chaitanya wanted an accredited degree, he wanted to fit in. If you look at Rupa Goswami's books, if you know the intellectual history of India, you know that Rupa Goswami's books perfectly fit into the intellectual climate of his time. For example, what's called rasa vichar, rasa analysis, the 5 primary rasas, 7 secondary rasas. That had been around for centuries. Rupa Goswami didn't invent that. It had been around for centuries. And it was a cornerstone of Indian intellectual activity in terms of analyzing literature, analyzing drama, even analyzing Shastra, and everything. And so it was a big thing. And Rupa Goswami Krishnized it in a very brilliant way. Or, for example, if you look at his other books, Vidagdha Madhava, Lalita Madhava, if you look at his Sanskrit, the Sanskrit is not like the Mahabharata or the Bhagavad Gita. The Sanskrit is not like the Bhagavatam, but it is the Sanskrit that was very fashionable at the time. And he did it brilliantly. And so even in terms of literary style, see, I think there's a philosophical misunderstanding among, there's a pretty good list of them. But here's one, that if, for example, here's one of them, if literature, or let's say if some cultural production, whether it's literature, whether it's cooking, whatever, if it's pure, then it can't be historically situated. In other words, if we write books that are pure, they stand above time, they stand outside of human culture, outside of history, which is of course silly. So let's look at Rupa Goswami's books. They're pure. Rupa Goswami is pure. He's a Nitya Siddha devotee of Krishna. And yet, he expressed his purity through different cultural vehicles that were absolutely historically situated. They absolutely reflect the historical period he was living in. For example, Bhaktisiddhanta. Bhaktivinoda Thakur didn't have really brahmacharya sannyasis. Bhaktisiddhanta really reestablished a lot of items of Vedic culture. And so he looked around. Bhaktisiddhanta saw the Ramakrishna mission was very popular. And you know what Prabhupada thought of the Ramakrishna mission. And so he used their dhotis. And that is our eternal ISKCON sannyas dhoti. And you can even see in ISKCON art sannyasis wearing those paintings, those dhotis millions of years ago. So, and then a shirt, what about a shirt? Hey, the popular shirt in India was the Muslim shirt, called the kurta, which is a Muslim word. So Ramakrishna mission dhoti, Muslim shirt, bingo. But as soon as ISKCON uses it, it becomes eternal. And it's kind of like retroactively placed back millions of years ago in ancient India. There was a dynasty in basically what is now Tamil Nadu, the southeast corner of India, a strong dynasty many centuries ago called the Chola dynasty, and they had this very popular blouse, women's blouse, that became the Choli, which means a Chola blouse. But of course, that's what the gopis were in the spiritual world. I could go on and on and on to amuse you with these things, but the fact that to please, you should only offer the deities Turkish food. I mean, it's not that all of our food is, Muslim, but halava is an Arabic word and a Muslim preparation, and kofta. Anyway, there's a long list there. So, but why not? Krishna likes Turkish food. So my point is that as far as Vedic culture, it's a culture of knowledge. If we want to use that term, which we can, there's nothing wrong, but we should understand what it means. For example, Varnashram is Vedic. Varnashram is everywhere in the Vedas. And we have in Bhagavad Gita that love for Krishna is the perfection of Vedic civilization. So all these things, whether it's Varnashram, whether it's love for Krishna as the perfection of life, that one should accept a guru, all these things are Vedic. Everything that really matters to us is actually coming from the Vedic civilization. And the ethnic part, like certain recipes, no. Krishna talks about food in the mode of goodness. By the way, what is food in the mode of goodness? Well, I'll say food in the mode of passion, something, and you'll never get like passion, mode of passion food in ISKCON, because it's food that's very spicy, right? Never find spicy food in a Hare Krishna temple. And it's food that's very healthy, and you can live a long life. You just eat in temples at least at the age of 42. Yeah, so with a little luck and a few bypasses. So, what I want to present, what I believe, this is just me, what I believe we should be presenting to the world is a spiritual science which consists of living your life in goodness and offering that life to Krishna in service. Very simple formula. Live a life of goodness and devote your life to God. Well, who's going to, any sincere person is going to accept that. That's a spiritual science. The idea of re-ethnicizing yourself or all this stuff, or, performing 108 rituals if you tragically drool while you're sleeping, or I mean, some of them, you gotta love it, you know? Just, I mean, who needs daytime television when you belong to a religious institution? So, I mean, just for the sheer entertainment value. One of my favorites is, anyway, I don't want to get in trouble. One of my favorites is that, like, you can't go on the altar with sewn clothing. And, I mean, if that's the rule here, I'm not criticizing this temple or any other temple because, I mean, the temples in ISKCON are basically just faithfully following what the standards because they're faithful members of ISKCON. So I'm not criticizing. I'm not criticizing the temples or laughing at them. I am laughing at the idea. If someone, for the love of God, can tell me where the impurity is in a stitch of, you know, in a thread, I will be very grateful to you. And the funny thing is, we have all these pictures of Prabhupada brazenly installing Radha Krishna deities, worshiping deities with sewn clothing, which is, but we're just going to keep following Prabhupada like that. So, you know, Prabhupada, it's just, or again, this last one, my favorite one, which I always mention, is the, I mean, if I hadn't joined the Hare Krishna one, I would never know that actually what appears to be just the sky or the empty space is actually filled with malevolent beings who target uncovered right hands chanting Gayatri mantra. And enter through that hand, I guess technically through your arm, up to your subtle body, and then where you have this, you don't know, this subtle little, this like subtle warehouse where all your piety is stored, and then they just start, you know, they like drive a subtle truck up to the door of your inventory and start stealing all your pious activities. But the good news is, lest you panic, the good news is although they penetrate right hands, they do bounce off left hands. And they also bounce off cotton. So they can travel through the universe, they can go through your body into your subtle body, but they do bounce off cotton. And so hang in there. Anyway, that's what I believe we have to do. We have to demythologize. We have to get rid of the superstition and just give people simple spiritual science. For example, if a scientist in Australia or Mexico or America or Europe, anywhere, they invent, let's say, a cure for disease, the whole world wants it. When I take, let's say I take some medicine that really helps me, I don't even ask, like, well, what country was this invented in? No one asks that. Science is science. And the point is, I mean, what if, let's say some powerful new medicine was invented in India, but in order to buy the medicine, you've got to, you know, it has this really ornate Indian style bottle, and then you've got to, you know, do all this Indian stuff to get the bottle open. I mean, it's not like that. People just want the medicine. So if we just present a pure spiritual science, just a spiritual science, Krishna consciousness, the world will accept it. And if we insist on, if we demand that people jump through all kinds of ethnic hoops, we are not going to become a world religion. It's just, you know, that's just the way it is. I didn't make it that way. It's just the way it is. And if you study history, if you study social science, it's just the way it is. In the history of the world, every small religious movement that actually made it and became an important religion had to adjust. It's just the way it is. As far as the details, I don't get into the details because I respect the leaders the local leaders here, the leaders everywhere. You're all intelligent. It's not my job to tell you how to run your centers. I'm just trying to give some basic principles, and then you're all intelligent. You know your local situation. And I believe you should just apply it, in the most practical way possible. So, thank you very much for your attention, and any questions on these points? Feel free to agree with me. Yes?
With the political right coming more so in society, where it's, the political right is taking over in terms of more, like you said, in Europe. Obviously, Christian West has had a big impact there because it won't threaten their ideologies. We can work within those cultures, obviously, right?
Yeah, and for example, in Australian culture, in French culture, in any culture, there is you just call it, say, a stratum, which is in the mode of goodness. I mean, there's an amazing amount of food in the mode of goodness in Australia, healthy food. There's all kinds of, respectable, decent clothes you can wear. For example, devotees, this has been a pastime in the Hare Krishna movement since the beginning, sort of like wildly exaggerating just how horrible the world is. And, for example, I live near UCLA. It's a university now rated as the top public university in the United States. And there are private schools like Harvard and Yale, but in terms of the public university, it's the top public university in the country. And it's very close to where I live, so I walk there all the time. Japa walks in the morning. And I do my little cultural anthropology while I'm walking. I just, for example, how are people dressed? Because, if you hear from some preachers, everyone's like, the more decent ones are half naked, and it's all completely disgusting. And what I found is, and this is UCLA, this is, California, it's not rural Mississippi or something. And they're just dressed the way we always dressed. The boys and girls, basically, they'll just wear like pants, or in the warmer weather, maybe some shorts, decent shorts, and they'll wear a t-shirt. Or they'll wear a little jacket or something. And there are some people, who think if you've got it, flaunt it. There are kind of like the bestial among them. But I would say that most of the students are just dressed in a comfortable, practical way with really very little attention to trying to show their bodies off. They just cotton shirts, simple pants or shorts, comfortable shoes. And I was amazed. It's kind of, they dress the way that people dressed when I was a kid. It really hasn't changed. That's another thing that's very popular to say among devotees, that, well, why should we try to, fit in, because they're always changing constantly, everything's changing out there. Actually, it's not. Some things are changing, but I see thousands of university students where I live that dressed almost exactly the way people dressed when I was in the university. So it's not wildly, kaleidoscopically changing at every moment. There actually is a stable Western culture. And in that stable Western culture, which is increasingly world culture, there is one part of it, which is the mode of goodness. There's one part of it. There is, in Australia, for example, it's obviously there's all the modes, but there definitely is a big chunk of the mode of goodness in terms of how people, the way they dress, the foods that people can eat. So you can live in the mode of goodness for Krishna, devoted to Krishna, in the mode of goodness in Australia, and completely fit in as a normal person. And that's what I think, that's what I think we should do. That's my view. Yes?
Maharaj, if I can, I'd like to admit first of all that I've actually listened to all of your talks over the last 2 years. I think I've studied everything you've said in English.
Wow, you know it better than I do.
You know what you're saying. So yeah, if you think I'm a bored critic, please. But I'm actually wanting to give a perspective from a subjective point of view here in Australia. And I think if you can give a fairly subjective view in Australia, it's a fairly simple view of the world, in that you know, we do play a part in the world here. We see a lot of things relevant to everywhere else in the world. I would like to say to you that I would like to get you to hear a little bit about this perspective, because wouldn't want to rip you off too much as in, you know, having too much of an objective view of Australia. For instance, I think Australian people, and I'll hear it from Australians, are one of the most selfish people on the planet, because they, you know, have taken to so many things we have in common, you know, around the world. There's as much as exploitation economically. You know, I had the pleasure of hearing today your 2-hour talk at Currumbin Beach, and just how the reasoning was that the right-wing people are the conservatives are much more reasonable.
I was speaking specifically about an intellectual conservatism, which is being led by prominent scholars at the best universities. And I also mentioned that, you know, there's a smart right and there's a stupid right. But as far as Australia, you know, when Prabhupada was here, there was this pastime where devotees would come to Prabhupada and kind of bash their countries. And Prabhupada's reaction was interesting. That was a very common thing. Prabhupada, like now, you know, the priests are eating children or something. You know, they would just try to find some exotic news article or something. And Prabhupada, I remember one time I was walking with Prabhupada, and Brahmachari came to him and said, Prabhupada, he was a book server, and said, Prabhupada, you know, the karmis, they're really demonic, or this or that. And Prabhupada said, no. He said, actually, they're basically good. They just, they're ignorant. You have to teach them. And so, I mean, you have to live here. I mean, I can tell you how bad people are where I live, but my impression coming to Australia is that, I mean, the overwhelming majority of people seem to be just nice people. And they are ignorant. They are ignorant. And, you know, if people are not instructed, then they won't always do the right thing.
I just want to relate to how we can stand up, is because I still relate myself as the Hare Krishna, somebody who chants Hare Krishna. And to relate to people as in the common denominators, like for instance, the biggest common denominator that we all face in the world is the economic situation. And how we're all up against the same inequality that is, you know, is spread around the world. And how the Hare Krishnas are saying something different, in that we do believe in something greater than ourselves.
Yeah, but frankly, the difference in wealth distribution is much worse in India than in Australia.
Right?
I mean, you have much greater extremes of, you know, poverty, and Australia, relatively compared to other parts of the world, has one of the most balanced systems. In terms of, I mean, even in America, for example, you find extreme displays of wealth all over the place, and then you find more poverty. And so here it's more like England and other parts of Europe where it's more balanced. So yes, I mean, there are problems here, but personally, I think that it's hard to insult people and attract them at the same time. And so, I mean, of course, people here have faults, like everywhere.
But we're sharing this common denominators, like what are the problems? I mean, for me, I think is to say Vedic culture. What is Vedic culture? Krishna is saying he is to be known. We are saying there is a God, so as we are, you know, of course, you know, in most people's view of being religious in that sense. But we are presenting something that says if we live a godly way, you will get good results. Basically, you will enjoy a better life.
Yes.
So as to show that better life means we have to be able to highlight what are, you know, the ignorances that we're living in. And this is.
No, of course we can, but again, they say hate the sin, not the sinner. I think if we're nice to people, and if we respect them, they'll respect us, and then, you know, then we explain to them what our point of view is. Yes?
Sorry, just on that note, when I first moved to Australia, I moved into a community. I actually made a point of, I'm going to see what it's like to live away from Hare Krishna people, because I was born and bred with them. So I moved to a community, and I wasn't even sure how I was going to introduce myself to people, but I had, you know, just in normal clothes, I had a normal life, got a job, my kids went to school, and people would ask me, you know, hey, where are you from, who are you? And I said, I'm Radha, I'm a Hare Krishna. Like, I didn't even know I was gonna introduce myself so openly. And people were like, oh my God, that is so cool. I love you. Where are you from? Tell me about your life. They were just so excited that it was actually just a really
Yeah.
cool thing to be a Hare Krishna. And they actually said, where are you guys? We never see you anymore. Like, where's the food and where are you guys on the street? And so actually the Australian public, I found were very welcoming and they love the Hare Krishnas. And I grew up in France too, so it was like, suddenly it was like, oh wow, I'm really cool now. Because growing up I was not so cool. We'd go on Harinam with our devotee clothes and it was like, so, you know, I that's just my.
Yeah, I mean, Australia has a lot of things which Prabhupada teaches are signs of good karma.
Yeah.
In terms of weather, in terms of beauty, in terms of prosperity. So, of course, I mean, there's all kinds of bad things everywhere. But I still think, you know, Aussie, 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 oi, oi, oi.
I didn't mean to bring anything up to say there was going to be too much negative, but the Australian people did take up the economic opportunity, for instance, to make inequality so different in a very short period of time.
Yeah, but let's just try to attract them. Yes.
Just on the crux of your lecture, trying to find this similarity around the world. It's often been said that Vedic culture was spread, culture, but aspects of Vedic aphorisms were spread right throughout the planet. We can find something there in Mexico, we can find something in South America.
Yeah, because first of all, Krishna doesn't say in the Bhagavad Gita that knowledge comes from India. What he says is knowledge comes from goodness. And if you look at history throughout the world, throughout all different times, there have been good people. Not everyone. Sometimes maybe they were rare, sometimes maybe they were common. But everywhere in the world, throughout history, some people were good. And those people had knowledge. They understood we're not the body. They understood that happiness comes from virtue and not from selfishness. And so, the basic wisdom of life, maybe they didn't understand that, you know, God is blue, but the you know, like the basic wisdom of life, you find everywhere in the world, not because some Indian sage got in a boat and sailed across the ocean, necessarily, because we actually don't find in the Bhagavatam any mention of crossing oceans. Interestingly, we do find, the only place we find in our literature about, let's say, maritime travel, is you get this, this metaphor that, for example, the material world's dangerous, like a merchant crossing the sea. And so what sea were they talking about? For example, we knew there was a pretty lively trade going on between Western India and the Persian Gulf many, many thousands of years ago. And if you look at a map, it's not a big distance. And so in those days, they didn't have, you know, really big, safe ships. And so you could go in a boat and you could actually kind of go along the coast from Western India and then the southern coast of Pakistan and on into, you know, southern and on into the Persian Gulf. And so we know that trade was going on. And so there was trade, and so you hear about merchants crossing the sea. But as far as, for example, a king that had a multi-continent kingdom or something, we don't really hear about that. For example, when the Pandavas did their Dig Vijay, conquering the directions, where, who was it? I think Arjun went to the north, or Bhima went to the east, and someone went to the west and the south, Nakul and Sahadev. None of them, when the Pandavas, quote unquote, conquered the world, no one got into a boat and crossed the sea. So if you look at the Mahabharata, conquering all directions, Dig Vijaya, dig means direction. It doesn't mean going to, well, Australia, or it doesn't mean going to Florida, you know, putting up your beach umbrella. So what was the world? For example, Prabhupada said whoever ruled in Hastinapur ruled the world, but again, at least in the Mahabharata that has come down to us today, which is a book which is intensely concerned with geopolitical history. That's what the Mahabharata, in terms of the narrative, it's all about geopolitical events. And it's basically South Asia. I mean, more, certainly including Pakistan, certainly including what is now Bangladesh, and even including parts of what is now Afghanistan. For example, Gandhari. Dhritarashtra's wife is called Gandhari because she's the wife, she came from Gandhara, which is Kandahar, which is a very famous province of Afghanistan. But as far as, let's say, going up to the British Isles or to Italy or into the Mediterranean, or it's, at least we just don't have descriptions.
So
It-
that was next.
Oh,
Just on this world culture, which we call Vedic, but when you get into Srimad Bhagavatam, and we realize through etc. the real place,
Yeah.
the real event, when we get into Bhagavatam, we're actually then talking about celestial and interplanetary
yes.
arrangements. So this goes way beyond, and in these contexts, there is Vedic behavior.
Well, all ancient cultures talk about communication between different worlds. All ancient cultures talk about that. The ancient Greeks, for example, talked about the different yugas. They said the Golden Age, the Silver Age, the Bronze Age, and the Iron Age. That's in Hesiod. It was around the time of Homer back then. So yeah, the fact that they're yugas, the fact that there were communication with demigods, that's found everywhere in ancient literature. Yes.
I just want to ask a question. You've really nicely described the non-negotiable principles and then the details.
Yes.
Sometimes we feel apprehensive about details. Maybe we find some psychological comfort in those. How would you define the details versus the non-negotiable principles?
Like a Socratic general definition?
We could start with that.
The details are simply activities or practices which are not essential for spiritual life. For example, I don't think it's scientific to say if you take a piece of cotton and fold it this way, it becomes spiritual. If you fold it that way, it's material. I don't really understand that. What Krishna describes in the Gita, the spiritual sciences, where he says Brahmarpadam Brahmahavir and so on, that's verse 424, that when you offer something to the Absolute, the object you offer takes on the same spiritual nature. That's what Prabhupada called spiritualizing things. So that's right in the Bhagavad Gita 424. There's just no scriptural basis that, let's say, Indian recipes are intrinsically spiritual, or Indian dress styles are intrinsically spiritual. It's just, why would that be the case? But, for example, chanting the name of God, that is spiritual. Yes? Hare Krishna.
Thank you for giving nice classes. My question is that, for me personally, I don't think I'm smart enough to distinguish what's the right and what's wrong. And I'll give an example of my son wanting to fit in. Okay, so he wanted to go to Scouts and he wanted to fit in, so he bought the vegan sausages to fit in. But I wasn't happy about that.
Why?
Because it's onions and garlics, and I've been told from 2 spiritual teachers that onions and garlics contain coming back into meat from scriptural references.
With all due respect to my fellow preachers, can we be serious? I mean, it's onion and garlic are not sinful.
They're in the Motorhashina.
Well, so is most of the Mahaprasad in ISKCON Hare Krishna temples,
Yes.
It's no bad.
I mean, I don't, it's not, we don't eat onion and garlic, but that's a Pan-Asian thing. Buddhists, for example, I mean, if you go, like in LA, you go to Thai restaurants, they don't serve onion and garlic. It's not even a Vaishnava thing, it's just an Asian thing. That somehow onion and garlic, I mean, garlic, there is, I think, some scientific basis for it, that, it can, it's medicinal, But, I mean, here's the Prabhupada story.
Thank you.
that Panchadavita Maharaj, when he was being ISKCON, told me, he spent a lot of time with Prabhupada in India. And so they were eating at a life member's house. That was half the preaching in India, eating, because it like created this social bond that when you go and eat in people's homes and you're a sadhu, and then they feel obligated, and then they become life members. So they were eating at a life member's house, and Panchadavita noticed that there was onion in the sabji. And so he said to Prabhupada, Prabhupada, there's onion in the sabji. And Prabhupada's concern was not the onion. Prabhupada's concern is that their host would be offended. And so to make sure the host, Prabhupada first of all told him to keep quiet, and then to make sure the host wasn't offended, Prabhupada ate more of that sabji and praised it. So I don't think we have to make up all kinds of stories just to get people to follow rules. I mean, that's kind of what you do for children. I know there was that, what was that, Miss Potter, that nice Hollywood movie came out about that English lady that made up Mother Goose. You know what that is? Anyway, it came out in the story up in the Lake District that parents or mothers used to tell their children that if you leave the house and go out into the forest without cleaning up, then these evil spirits will take you away. So the kids would always clean up before they went out. And so, yeah, we don't eat onion and garlic. Clearly there's something about them which is maybe not great, but it's not sinful. And of course we avoid it, but it's not sinful. And it's not that every devotee that ever ate onion or garlic, within 96 hours became a carnivore. Or, in fact, I've never heard in my life of a devotee that, ate onion and garlic and then started eating meat. I've never heard of that in my life. Have you? Yeah, so I think, again, spiritual science.
Maybe what you're saying to me here is it's okay to be a bit lenient, but is there a time when you draw the line?
Well, I think it's cost benefit analysis. What's the cost of telling your child you can't be a scout and you can't eat something so the other kids don't make fun of you? And it's like start adding up the cost. And then see,
The best way to add up the cost would be to factor in the devotion to Krishna to get to progress you through the journey.
Of course.
Betterment and develop strong spiritual skills to sort of not necessarily bash the bullies or eat whatever you shouldn't be eating for the bullies or dress a certain way because the bullies. Just be your own little boss.
Not according to Bhagavad Gita. Yeah, no. Because, I'll explain. Because what Krishna said, some people are like that. Some kids are like that. They're just like, I don't care. Like, for example, I have godbrothers who love to go out in public and just, wearing robes and everything. And personally, everyone's different. Personally, and this is like,
But
there's...
if you wanted to be a Krishna
we wanted to be a devotee of Krishna, not necessarily someone that has to wear Indian clothes. So the point is, what Krishna says in the Gita is that in terms of your human needs, you should be moderate. Don't eat too much, don't eat too little. Don't sleep too much, don't sleep too little. It is a human need for most people not to be humiliated. It is a human need for most people, I just want to say, it's a human need for most people not to, every day of their life, have other people laugh at them. And actually what we know from psychology, this is social science, that, some people like to be weird, some people like to be different. They just, not for religion's sake, they just want to dress or do something to their body which makes them very different and exotic. Some people, that's what they want. They want to occupy an exotic space in society. However, I'm not one of them. Maybe because I'm a second child, I don't know what it is. But I'm very different. I'm very different. And although I kind of, I manned up and toughed it out and everything, but I got to a certain point in my life where I just like, I do not, when I walk out the door, I do not want people staring at me, making fun of me. I just don't want it. It's enough. I've had it. And some people are different. Everyone's different. Personally, I've had it. I just don't want that kind of attention. I want to earn people's admiration by my practical achievements, not just, and I think it's created like a type of insecurity. It's like we're so, I think and this is just my view, again, this is just the way I see it. I think that many devotees have become so dependent on being exotic. Like when a Hare Krishna walks down the street, everyone knows that's a Hare Krishna walking down the street. And there's a type of insecurity. If we don't go out very exotically, how can we get attention? How can we spread the movement? Well, my answer was, well, how do the religions that are much more successful than us, what do? And so there's this insecurity that without being very different and very exotic, how can we ever get anyone's attention?
Back to what you said, what don't they do?
What's that?
What don't they do perhaps as well, like you said, what do they do to get that attention? What don't
Well,
they
no,
do?
I'll tell you what they do.
Yeah.
Here's some of the things they do. They go out and talk to people. They're very diligent. They try to fit in. They try to, without compromise. I mean, a lot of things they do not because they're Jehovah's Witnesses, not because they're Mormons. They do it because it works. They do it because it works. Whereas we do things because we have certain ideology, which is not even that accurate. So Krishna says you have to be moderate. So I would say for most human beings, having a certain minimum amount of respectability in society is actually a need. It's a psychological need. And there's a whole branch of social science which is called the psychology of marginalized communities. Because when communities are, or believe they are, marginalized, or when they self-marginalize, it develops a certain kind of psychology which is not always very healthy. And I think an example of how that psychology manifests, and we are not above that. We have nervous systems like everyone else. It's just like, the idea that if you eat prasadam, you don't have to care about what's healthy or not. And, Prabhupada disciples are not famous around the world as like, they're the healthiest people in the world. A lot of my godbrothers and godsisters, I believe, left their bodies somewhat early because of that philosophy. So you may be a devotee, but yes, you are subject to the laws of nature because they're laws of God. If you don't eat healthy prasadam, you will suffer. So in the same way, there are certain laws which govern human emotional well-being. And although some people dig it, some people just, wow, that is so cool, I'm exotic, I'm different, I'm like far out. Some people love that. That's just the way they're wired. And most people aren't wired that way. And I'm not wired that way. And so I would say, just in terms of one's basic emotional health, I would say most people need to not be weird in society. It's just a basic emotional need, as much as not eating too much or too little, not sleeping too much or too little. And so I think if someone's child does not want to be humiliated, does not want other kids, staring, I think that is a natural desire that should be respected. Not to the point of saying, well, I'm going to eat meat.
Yeah,
So,
I'm
yeah.
not going to go to the temple every week, or having
Yes.
to read the Bhagavad Gita.
No, but that's what you see. But that's not a problem. Krishna says, don't eat too much or too little. So you can care too much about what society thinks,
Yeah.
and you can care too little. But I think, because if you tell a person, in order to become a member of this movement, not just a friend, but actually become a Vaishnava, you not only have to bow down to Prabhupada, which is a stretch for Western people. You not only bow down to Prabhupada, you not only accept Krishna as God, you not only accept the goal of your life is to give up sin and all that, I mean, that's already kind of, that's enough for most people. But not only that, you've got to act and dress and live in such a way that most people will think maybe you're a little crazy. I mean, why add that on? Why, someone already can't lift it, and so you start piling more stones on top of it. Why not make it easier for people?
If I may, just,
Yeah.
I'm so bad with names, one of you, I should know yours off by heart, but more just on that detail about, I feel some people what would be more in the direction, like, when it comes to feeling that you're coming close to meat-eating, so you're going against the regulated principles as opposed to the details. The fine details, I think, especially in Australia, that we're pretty used to, the culture's pretty diverse across the country, and there are people, who stick to it one way or another, but when you're trying to follow regular principles, and I grew up on the streets personally, but I get, born Vaishnava, but when you're trying to avoid breaking the principles, where does the detail lie there, as opposed to, where does the methodology that we need to stick to, and
Okay. Yeah, first of all,
Some of this,
first of all, I am not sure
thing.
that, let's say, eating onions or something like that is just like a step away from meat eating. Yeah, I personally just don't see why that would be true.
Is there a causal story about?
Well, let me. There's the second part of this question, then you can ask your question. So just don't forget your question. So, the second thing is, what was the second part of your question?
For those who are more concerned that we, yes, we can. Adapt
Oh yeah,
fast.
Krishna explains in the Bhagavad Gita, the way you're able to follow the principles strictly, you have a higher taste. And the higher taste comes from preaching. And I think it's probably, my guess is that for many devotees, I'm tempted to say most, it's easier to get them to go out and preach if they can do so without having people staring at them or smiling at them or thinking they look a little strange. I think that the more you go out and preach in a way which is respectable in society, the more devotees will want to go out and preach, and the more you preach, the more you have a higher taste, and it's the higher taste that allows you to follow the principles. Yes? So you...
No, I had heard there was a story that Vishnu cut the head off Rahu, and some drops of blood fell down, and that's where we get this idea that where these drops of blood fell, that's where the onions and garlic grew from, something like that. I remember hearing a story like that.
Actually, I heard the same story, but the brahmanas dropped the blood,
Okay.
There's some
Okay.
story somewhere like that. Yeah.
Okay, real world alert. First of all, the acharyas actually say in commentaries in the Bhagavatam, great acharyas, that Rahu doesn't really swallow the sun and the moon. That's just a story.
Yeah.
I mean, we know astronomically why there are eclipses. It's not because Rahu chases the sun and the moon and swallows them, and then they get burped out, and then they get re-swallowed or something. So as far as, all these stories about, drops of blood became onion and garlic,
It's almost getting like a big flat earth.
it's getting a little cartoonish. I think we can just say, I'll tell you what I would do. I would try to do a scientific study of onion and garlic and see if we can find that there's some, demonstrable properties, effects it has on the nervous system, on the brain, on consciousness, on the body. You see, I don't want to live in the Vaishnava version of a Harry Potter movie. And I really think that we should just, something like onion and garlic, it's scientific. If there's a rule, which there is, that say don't eat onions and garlic, there must be a good reason for it. And the good reason isn't that drops of blood fell. It's because that scientifically it has some effect on consciousness, on the nervous system, on brain function. For example, I had a friend, who's really a devotee, who had been in the Air Force, U.S. Air Force, and he said when he was flying, he was a navigator in the Air Force, that they were told not to eat garlic before they flew because it kind of slowed the brain down a bit. And so, yeah, I think we do things because there's a good reason, not because there's some magical story that some kind. It's because when you eat onion and garlic, it has some effect on your brain function, which is not conducive for Krishna consciousness. And if you explain that to people, I think, they may actually take you more seriously.
I was just gonna say.
Oh, yeah, and then you.
I don't know. I was going to say, sometimes when you're selling books, Maharaj, first thing people ask is it a religion? And you say, well, no, it's a cultural presentation, and then they're quite happy to take the book. So I'm just wondering, what's your idea of what's the, do we try and, are people seeing us as a religion? Some people just want to
Yeah.
Are we trying to
I would say
something else?
I would say it's a science to raise consciousness, to open your consciousness and become aware of, the metaphysical aspect of the universe. Or say it'll make you happy. Depends on who you're talking to. Yes, you want to say?
Just a funny thing about the details, how some of the details are actually quite useless. Well, in my opinion, like growing up, it was always like, you gotta cover your head. And I just turned around one day to my guru at the time and I went, well, I'm spending half my life worrying about covering my head and the other half covering my head. So all that time I'm worrying about covering my head, I'm not thinking about Krishna.
Well, first of all, there's no evidence in any scripture that women cover their head in Vedic culture. Show me one woman in the Bhagavatam that ever covered her head. I mean, it's just not, it may probably more likely a custom that came in with the Muslims. Yes.
Introduced by the Muslims.
Yeah.
The women were quite free in India.
Must be a Muslim.
Yes, they didn't used to wear cholis either, by the way.
So, let me, last couple questions. Back there, this person didn't get a chance.
So, Maharaj, in relation to this, how do you see deity worship fitting in with this, I guess?
I think deity worship can be explained scientifically. What I explain when I teach is that the people reject deity worship for the same reason that we have an environmental problem in the world. Because if you look at certain religions who are against idols, idols are good if you're a singer, right? Australian Idol, American Idol. Sometimes idols are good, sometimes they're not good. But actually, you see, if you talk about a deity, you have to get to the philosophical issue. The point is, what is the status of matter? First of all, what is matter? Because if you're saying God cannot appear in matter, then the question is, what is matter? And physics can't really tell you. I mean, they can tell you some things about it, but they don't know if there's smaller particles than the ones they found, because it's at such a, infinitesimal, microscopic level that you have kind of like these mathematical equations and speculations, and so it's, even in physics, it gets to a certain point where it kind of fades into almost like a mystical uncertainty about what matter is. Now, the reason we have an environmental problem in the world is because people don't respect material energy. If you look at so-called primitive peoples, what they tend to do is that they live in an enchanted world. So there's not just a forest you can go and just mass cut trees to make toilet paper, or well, actually that's probably a good idea. Or let's say junk mail and this and that. I mean, so much paper is wasted. Why? Because there's a goddess in the forest. And you can't just go and cut all the trees down because you'll offend the goddess. Or the river. Rivers are sacred. There are gods and goddesses in rivers. And so the world is enchanted. And because the world's enchanted, you have to respect nature. However, this sort of agnostic materialism, the modern world, they've disenchanted nature. Actually, it started almost 2,000 years ago with Paul of Tarsus, St. Paul, that's how you see it, where, for example, he got a letter. Half the New Testament is just Paul answering letters or writing letters. Like the book of Romans is a letter to an early Jesus community in Rome, or a letter to the Corinthians in the city of Corinth, and so on. And so someone wrote to him, this is in the New Testament, and said, there's a fight going on in our community. That never happens at ISKCON, never find conflict in temple communities. So that's what he did. He was kind of like the original GBC for the Jesus movement. And so the fight was over whether or not you could eat meat. Because some of the members of the community ate meat. Some of the members said we shouldn't eat meat, not because they were pious, but because in that time, which was almost everyone was pagan, all the meat in the market was offered to idols, to demigods. And therefore some people in the community said that we shouldn't eat meat offered to false gods. So Paul wrote back saying that, well, it's not really a problem because the gods don't exist. However, to keep peace in the community, maybe don't eat it. Now it's interesting because Paul is actually deviating even from the Old Testament. If you take a university level course in the Old Testament, what you'll learn is that in the Old Testament it says in many places there are many gods. But you have to worship Yahweh, the God of the Old Testament. Think of the first commandment, or what is the second commandment? That you shall have no other gods before me. Now, why would that be an issue if there's no other gods? You shall have no other gods before me means there are other gods, but just don't put them before me. Now, so you see this disenchanting of the world, this voiding of the universe. Like there's God, there's the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and besides that, the universe is sort of spiritually void. It's just dead matter, and then a few souls on earth. And so this process of disenchanting the natural world practically began back then. And of course, when you get into the age of secularism and atheism, agnosticism, then it's just, they strip the world. And so in a world which is stripped of any sacred value, you just basically, nature as business. The more you can monetize nature, the better. Nature is just a bunch of stuff out there to be monetized. And so this sort of degrading and degraded concept of nature, it's for that very reason that you can't have deities. Because if God is the most holy and nature is just a bunch of profane stuff, how can you bring these two together? But if in fact nature is the energy of God, if nature is originally divine, if we're the ones that make it profane by our stupid behavior, but in fact nature itself is actually divine, enchanted, and connected to God, then it's a whole new ballgame, ontologically speaking. And then the idea that God can appear in his own energy, what's the problem? And you got a problem, man? I mean, it's just, what's the problem? And I've explained this in many universities in America. Environmental problem, don't worship idols, same philosophy. So it begins by asking the question, what is matter? Philosophically speaking, what is it? Where does it come from? And they don't ask that question. So maybe we'll stop here. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna. Sayonara.
Vedas Goswami ki.